Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. And today we've got a video for you about the torpedo defense and the fuel tanks, and we're going to try and see the armored belt. Right now, I am standing in a space that in the original plans for the ship doesn't exist at all. If you check out this video on USS Massachusetts, you can see that right under the main deck, along the entire middle part of the ship, there's a notch cut out of the side. One of the interesting features of South Dakota class battleships is the cutout between the top of third deck and the top of the main deck along the midships portion of the ship. Iowa class battleships were originally designed to have an identical cutout throughout most of the length of their ships, but during construction it ended up being plated over with 1.5-inch thick shell plating, just like the rest of the hull. And that notch has the main deck above it and the fuel tanks below it, and you might even be able to see the oval-shaped access hatches to the fuel tanks. Initial plans for the Iowa-class battleship had that same notch. You're saving weight by not including it. However, as various escalator clauses are invoked and then cease to be used at all as treaty restrictions are broken, the need to save weight disappeared, and so this space was plated in with shell plating out here, which goes from the main deck to third deck, which is the top of the tanks in this instance. So this was going to be the initial shell plating, and they added it. So on South Dakota, you have to go on the outside of the ship and then through an opening like this, hopefully with some sort of harness or scaffolding involved. It doesn't seem like something you can do while the ship is underway. On the Iowa-class battleships, there is an access hatch. There tend to be in berthing spaces or offices here on second deck. So you can climb into this space, which by all rights shouldn't exist, and then access your tanks this way. There probably is no reason to access these tanks while underway, but it's an option that Iowa-class sailors have. The South Dakota-class sailors do not. So before I climb down there, we've got the name of the tank on board, an original plate. Just says that it's a series of void spaces down there. But we chose this one because it has a fairly intact ladder, and some of the other ones do not. Anyway, even though this is a void space and cofferdam, which would be empty at all times, we've got overboard discharge from fuel oil and ballast. So ballast would be salt water, and an overflow header. So if the tank's filled up too much, it can be pumped overboard. So let's climb down there and see if it's a really narrow space as we go down. Yeah, it's a cofferdam. If it opens into other spaces, I might be mistaken. Since this ship was decommissioned in '91, this tank has been open. So it has been ventilating. Since 2000, when the museum acquired the ship, all of the tanks on board were cleaned out. So there's no residual fuel or anything else like that. So they are completely clean and full of breathable air. Now, one more cool thing to point out before we go down. Notice how most of the deck here is flat. Now we get this little angle over here. I'm betting that this angle is where the 12-inch armored belt and the 6-inch armored deck are meeting each other. So I'm betting that this is the 6-inch deck, and then that this angled piece is the armored belt, and then it's got this piece welded on at these scallop joints so they could rivet on this deck attachment. Let's get down there. All right, so now we are in one of the tanks. The torpedo defense on Iowa-class battleships is 22 feet deep. Well, we've got about a curator and a quarter's width here, and that's it. But this is my first time ever seeing the armored belt. And that's what this is. It's interesting because on the other side of this, you see where it's bolted onto the holding bulkhead, and you see the cups welded over it and whatnot. But this is the actual armored belt. And look at how smooth that is. Other armor on the ship just doesn't come out this smooth. There's another really, really cool thing going on here. The water line is probably over my head somewhat. And every book I've ever read on Iowa-class battleships says that the armored belt starts out at 12.1 inches thick at the bottom second deck, the top of third deck, and then it tapers as it goes down to the 1.6 or whatever inches thick at the bottom. Well, look at this right here. This is proof that it doesn't taper. There is a 12.1 inch band, and then there is a thinner band under it. And maybe this thinner band is going to taper as it goes down. But it is not tapering here. Oh, look at that. This has been machined to the right thickness. You see these grooves cut into it? That wasn't cast this way, which is what we see here. It's actually got machining grooves there. And books always say that the belt tapers to a 1.62 or something at the bottom. That's how it was cast. But the shipyard actually machines it down to 1.5 inches so that it fits with the other plating around it. Now, obviously, up here we're probably still at 6 or 8 inches thick. So they've machined it down a little bit, maybe just for smoothness. But I'll be interested to see if we go to the bottom, if we're going to see similar machining there. Like I said, every book I've ever read says that it tapers, and it is the research of one of our volunteers, John Miano, who is writing his own book on the design and construction of Battleship New Jersey, who told me, no, look for a step like this. So his book will probably come out in a couple of years. He's still working on it. I am looking forward to getting the first draft to review very soon. Now, while we're in this space, clearly you can tell that it's not 22 feet thick, or 22 feet deep like the torpedo defense is supposed to be. There are other tanks outboard of us, 2 of them, and then there's this one, and then there's the holding bulkhead inboard of us. So this is not shell plating. Now you can hear that that's pretty thin. That does not bend and reverberate. It's really interesting to see here. At one point, they had additional access hatches, and access hatches getting us through the bulkhead, and they've been plated over. I don't think these were to add new equipment. Because we're pretty deep into the ship here, and they're no larger than the actual hatches that get down there. So I think that at one point you could access more stuff from in here, and then they decided they wanted to strengthen the torpedo defenses on these ships, which were determined to be inadequate during construction. So this might be some remnant of that. Here we've got power going down, and this might be to pumps or float switches. It just looks like 110 power. What else? We've got pad eyes like this welded all over the place. There are many, many more of these. I'm not sure what these were for, whether something was mounted on them or if they were used to lift something into place. It might have been involved with putting the armored belt on. I'm not entirely sure because this is pretty beefy. So I'm not quite sure what these fittings are, but they show up in a couple of places. And they've got a hole drilled in the middle so that you can weld in there along with around the edges, but they've only been tacked on the corners. They haven't been hit everywhere else. So maybe it's not something as heavy as this armor. And while we're here, we can tell when the last time this was painted. It says Kilroy was here November of '69. So it was clearly painted prior to November of '69, which is the end of our Vietnam era commission. So possibly these coatings are from earlier than that. At a minimum, they're from then. And it's really weird. We do not see the Kilroy was here moniker on this ship very frequently. Now let's take a look at the tanks that are lower than this one, because right now we're just a little bit below the waterline. I don't believe this would have ever been liquid loaded, but the tanks below us probably were. Or actually, this far inboard, they would have been kept void spaces, but they could have been liquid loaded to counter flood or to pump out water if we're damaged. So let's keep going down. All right, so down there, we had a suction valve in the far, let's see, that would be the far aft end of the compartment, which is probably the low spot in the room for if that did flood. There was the tiniest bit of oily water in the bottom there. And we could see the armor. It all had these machining stripes on it, so it was ground down from the thickness that the yard received it in to be the size prescribed in the plans. And there were two seams. It seemed like every 8 to 10 feet there was a seam. And in one of them, the armor curved in, so that was probably it tapering to go from this thickness up top to the thinness of the bottom layer. I've been in a couple of tanks now, and it seems like there are 3 different types of ladders used. There's the regular aluminum ladders, which are just full ladders mounted on brackets, and those are probably all from the 80s. There's these kinds, which are rungs individually welded in, and then there's that kind, my least favorite, which is just 2 wires tensioned at the top and the bottom with basically dogging wrenches, pieces of pipe with holes drilled into them. So underneath each of the pipes that are ladder rungs is a small piece of metal that keeps it from falling too far, but there isn't one above it, so it can go up. And of course, the wire's tensioned, but it's still loose enough to wobble. I do not like those at all. But we're back now. So we made it out. Thanks for watching. If you ever want to see a tank put on Battleship New Jersey's tour route, let us know in the comment section down below. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, but also from a number of organizational and individual sponsors, including viewers like you. Your support over the last year has allowed us to go from making 1 video a week to making 5, and we really appreciate that. There's a link in the description below if you would like to continue to support us. Also, remember to like, share, and subscribe so that you're notified when we're putting out all of these new videos. See you next time.